Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome to Shape the System. Very excited today to talk about fibre with Graham Stewart. Now there's multiple types of fibre. I was thinking about this morning before I got on. There's the one that helps you, ease into old age. There's the one that gets you better internet, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about textiles, and I'm pretty excited about it because we've had a lot of talk about sustainability generally, and we've never really got into textiles and obviously the corollary of that in fashion. So Graham, I'd love to thank you firstly for being on the show, but I'd love to start just firstly with a bit about your background and then a little bit about how textiles works today and even just some definitions for people who've never understood this industry at all.
Hi, Vincent. Yes, thanks for inviting me on the pod. I'm really excited to be here. As far as my background in textiles is concerned, today what I'm really focusing on is a process called fibre52.
Right.
It's complicated why it's called fibre52. It's something to do with the adding up the chromosomes that come to 52, which actually means cotton. But yeah, I've been in the textile industry all my life. Pleased to say a lot of that in Australia, in the wool industry.
Yep.
But, these days I pivoted to cotton. I'm here in the USA, in South Carolina, which, as you probably know, the Carolinas are historically one of the biggest growing areas for cotton. And, one of the biggest processing areas for cotton. Still there's some going on, which is good for me. Mm-hmm. Although in America, I spent a lot of time over on the West Coast because there's a lot going on in Los Angeles where, there's a great deal of manufacturing that's come back to the US, good quality too, and some really big guys out there, some really big processors. Not all cotton, as you said, one of the reasons that I got into this was I wanted to challenge polyester and nylon for all the reasons that you mentioned in the introduction, and there's a lot of scrutiny going on there. Right. From a sustainability standpoint, even from shareholders, from investors and brands, the brands are coming under great scrutiny. And so, people are kind of asking, how is my product being processed? And, if I may, I'll tell you a little bit about why this process differs.
Yeah, I want to get to that, but I want to firstly understand a little bit more about some of the status quo, I guess. What I want to understand is how is the current textile industry, cotton, synthetics, I don't even know what the other options are. How is it inherently unsustainable? Help me understand mechanically why this industry is not sustainable to the level that it should be. And we can talk about fibre52 in that context a little bit later in regards to that.
Okay. Yeah. In textile processing, in all textile processing, you tend to use a lot of water, a lot of power, a lot of heat in the processing itself. There's also then the manufacturing of the fibre.
Right.
For instance, in polyester, it's a petrochemical based product. With nylon is the same. Are these products going to be sustainable long term? I very much doubt it.
Right.
Cotton should be, because it's a natural fibre. Wool should be, providing we keep the sheep happy. But as far as the processing goes, though, there's a dirty side to processing. For instance, there are all sorts of products added, all sorts of chemicals added in processing. And even to the point, what's been a big change over the past few years is there was a film, I'm trying to think what it was called, it's like Dark Waters, it was quite famous, and it was about PTFE and contamination and so on. And it was a hard-hitting film. A lot of those fluorocarbons, as they were, which are widely used or have been widely used in textiles, are getting banned.
Yep.
So in many countries, they're banned altogether. And again, we can get onto that because that's one of the drivers for this fibre52 process in being a more natural process. As far as the state of textiles is concerned, what has changed is since I began in textiles, we were focusing on more expensive textiles. Right.
Okay. Give me some examples.
Well, in wool and cashmere, and also there was some, polyester was just beginning. Nylon was there. viscose had started.
Right.
But basically, there wasn't a fast fashion industry, right? And what's changed all that are the big guys that are in fast fashion now.
Right.
And there's bigger quantities of textile being made. And you could say, look at your own country in Australia, where the numbers of sheep actually have declined quite rapidly over the years for a lot for economic reasons. But again, you look at how fast fashion works, and it's very much price conscious.
Yeah.
And so just about all our conversations in that, what I would call the scalable end of the business, really revolve around dollars or cents, actually.
we're not up to dollars. Come back. I want to come back on just a couple of things here. So there's this. There's obviously a lot of talk about fast fashion and fast fashion decreasing the cycle of fashion, as in how quickly things come out, how quickly they get bought, how quickly they get thrown away. And there's concern, obviously, that if you make a good and that good could be durable, you could have a pair of shoes for 20 years, but you make a pair that get bought every year. Economically, GDP goes up, that's better. But sustainability, it's hard, regardless of the approach to building the textile, it's hard to actually make that sustainable potentially. Is that connectivity right, that it's hard to have fast fashion be sustainable, or is that actually a bit of a falsehood? Is it possible to have things that are consumed more rapidly, but as long as the nature in which those goods are produced is sustainable, then it actually might be a net sum gain?
Yeah, and I think a lot of those brands are getting to grips with it. It's starting to happen. And so I think also what's happening is recycling.
As in recycling clothes.
Yeah, so this circular system is growing quite rapidly, and some of the brands have got really good. I won't mention the brands, but one that I think everybody knows around the world, they have a system where you can bring any clothing into their store, right, and they'll give you a voucher for it, and you get 10-15% off whatever it is, and they recycle. They do that. I mean, even here in the US, there are 3 recycling plants that I know of that are big and busy because of these programs just getting bigger and bigger the whole time. So I think that will actually grow. I think that's good. But the other thing that you mentioned there is, but how is it going to help if it's not made sustainably?
Right.
And again, I think the big guys, the brands, the fast fashion people, they are looking at that very, very hard. I do believe they're trying to be better. And again, that's been a big driver for me in pivoting into this cotton process.
Okay. And then just in getting to there's kind of a fundamental hypothesis here, which I kind of want you to either tell me it's true or tell me it's not true, and then why. It sounds to me like you're never going to be able to take a non-natural fibre, pick whichever one you want or all of them, and make that sustainable just by the nature of how those things are produced. You're literally starting with a set of ingredients that mean that it can never be sustainable, or it's incredibly challenging to make it sustainable. It requires pulling oil out of the ground to make nylon, presumably. I think that's just a gasoline-based or petrochemical-based approach. And so if you sort of take that forward, then the argument is if we're going to have a sustainable fashion industry / textile industry, then the only way to do that is with naturals. And the problem we have here is the natural fibres, cotton and cashmeres and wools, are not overwhelmingly and not produced and processed in a sustainable manner. And that's where we have to put our attention. Is that hypothesis fundamentally right?
I think that, again, Vincent, there are changes happening there too. We talk about recycling, but there are some quite popular processes which are really moving fast, where companies are, recycling, because there's recycling and recycling. A lot of recycling makes the fibre very, very short, so you can only use it in, stuffing for beds and things like that. And
there's a lot of beds.
There's a lot of beds. There's a lot of motor cars, because it's also used in soundproofing in motor cars.
Oh, okay.
He doesn't cost much, but he does the job.
Sure.
But now that there's a move to make another usable yarn again, what we call extrusion. So you can extrude the fibre again, the synthetic fibre, and reuse it, and keep on doing that. So that is a big move into sustainability. There's one here in America, which is invented by a cotton company, I believe, called Cyclo, CYCLO. And that's becoming big. That's really moving, and that's exactly what they're doing. They've got a very good solid, sustainable story behind that. Yeah. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, cool. And then so getting into the specifics around kind of cotton as an industry, you talked about the Carolinas historically had a huge amount of cotton. I'm guessing there's probably 4 or 5 locations globally that produce probably 80% of the world's cotton. That tends to happen in just about any major primary form of manufacture. So I'm taking a guess on that. Tell me if that's wrong. And is there an element here of everyone's kind of singing from the same song sheet? So an innovation that substantially changes the game from a sustainability perspective, coupled with a price advantage or a durability advantage, is ultimately going to be deployed into these markets. Is this kind of the nature of how cotton processing is happening today? Like, what does the actual industry look like today pre-Fibre52?
Yes, you're right. There have been attempts within the cotton industry for parts of the industry to use natural products to process. Mm-hmm. And instead of using the heavy chemicals, which we'll get onto. But yeah, there is a move within the industry for sure because of all the sustainability pressure to do things better, to use less water, to use less heat, to use less time in processing. Right. Is a big deal, And so that focus is beginning. I think it's just an interesting time in the textile industry where we've come to that inflection point. Yeah. We've talked about what's happening with other fibers. We've talked about what the big brands are doing. That's putting pressure on the growers and the processors to do things right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's part of this then and this is what we've seen played out in a couple of different industries. And I think back to an interview we did with Julia and Geordie Kay of Great Wrap, and they invented a compostable glad wrap, or a saran wrap, I think it's called in the US. And they ultimately had to invent new ways of working with chemicals, biodegradable chemicals, obviously, to create a product. And that product just didn't exist. And a big part of that was actually working out how to do the tooling. And in their case, they kind of had to go vertically integrated. They just said, you know what? The people who are already producing saran wrap kind of don't care about this. They're just not going to be doing this innovation. Are you faced with a similar challenge here, which is you've got a bunch of people who are the entrenched providers in the industry, and they either don't have the capability or the desire. They may have the desire, but they literally can't execute on the innovations, probably material science or process or even chemical that are required to do this. Is that kind of why this thing is kind of stuck at a point where it is an inflection, but it still hasn't inflected, if I can be blunt?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the processing side of it is expensive. And, for our business, Fibre52, we thought along those lines. Should we just be setting up to do this process ourselves, do it vertically, and then sell? Is that the way to go? Possibly. I mean, it's still on the table.
Right.
We're kind of hoping that this gets adopted widely enough that we don't have to do that.
Right.
We're not taking it off the table right now, I'm going to say. And interesting, you should mention compostability. Now, I think the Cyclo fibre I mentioned to you, a big part of that is it's a compostable polyester or a compostable nylon that they make, which again is a good move in sustainability. And it gets complicated, by the way, but it's not just compostable. We could have another podcast on that whole thing. But let's face it, it's happening.
Yeah,
that's.
And so let's get into sort of Fibre52, because the context I need inside of an existing processing plant. Let's understand just how they process cotton today. What arrives and what leaves and what happens in between, and give us some sense of the energy the materials use. And take any size you want, but give us some context on those numbers if you've got those as well.
Yeah, sure. Let's take the fabric business, because that's the easiest one to explain.
Sure.
We all know what a fabric looks like, either knitted or woven. We sometimes get them mixed up. Nice for you, by the way. But that's a knitted one, of course. Like your sweater, it's knitted. Your pants are probably woven, but they can all be made out of cotton. And what tends to happen is the cotton is in its raw state at that point. So the fabric still has what is widely known in the trade as trash, or vegetable matter, which has to come out. And then the cotton is yellow. It's a yellow color. And to get the right colors in dyeing and coloration, you have to bleach the cotton. So to get trash out, to get it as a white cotton, you have to go through this bleaching process. And that's really where I started working. I could see that this bleaching process was quite damaging because it's using heavy chemicals at high temperatures, a lot of water, and it's damaging the cotton. So the cellulose in the cotton is being hit by the heavy alkali and the temperature that goes into processing cotton. And I've gone away from that. So I'm using natural products that doesn't harm the cotton too much, that uses less temperature, uses less energy, but is much faster. So that bleaching process is almost twice up to, I'll put it that way, is up to twice as fast as to what's happening today.
Right.
And that's in standard machinery.
Yeah, I was going to come back to just sort of, there's two big chunks here. So raw material comes in, there is a bunch of trash, as you called it, particle matter, vegetable matter, is that what you called it the other time? Yeah. And so that feels like it's a process to get it out. It's not, you're not using necessarily, it might be energy, but there's not chemicals and, heat and water to deal with that, or maybe some water.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
and then
you do use chemicals.
Yeah. Oh, really? Even just to get the vegetable matter?
It's the same process. A bit
Got it.
comes out in the bleach process.
Got it. Okay. So there's this kind of magic black box that cotton goes in and out. The other end comes twine of some sort, or a long thread of thing on a spool that then says, now turn it into whatever form of material you want, woven, knitted, the like. And that's kind of how that black box looks.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Got it. And then in terms of I'm trying to make an analogy here, and this is probably going to be weird coming from a guy with no hair, but my analogy here is that if you've got someone who's got peroxiding their hair a lot, it damages the hair. There's a cellulose structure that is your hair, and if you go and put a whole bunch of chemicals in, and heat presumably as well, or the chemicals probably result in some form of heat, then this is very damaging to the thing that you're trying to change the nature of. Is that kind of our analogy here as to what's going on the dyeing side, or on the bleaching side?
You're spot on. Actually, as far as your hair's concerned, that your hair's the same amino acids as wool.
Right.
So it's a protein fiber, but cotton's a cellulose fiber.
Right. Okay.
Right. And the two kind of react differently with peroxide. In the peroxide is not that damaging on by itself, it's not that damaging on either fiber, whether it be cellulose or whether it be protein. It's when you add heavy alkali,
right,
that really doesn't help.
Right.
That works then with the peroxide to cause the damage.
Got it.
And that's what we're avoiding with the natural products.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. So now we're getting to the nub of it. So this was one of my sort of thoughts coming into this, because obviously in the way you're describing it, you can read about this on the Fibre52 site as well. It replaces all these things, or it greatly reduces all of these things. I think you mentioned 25% less water, 50% less energy in some of the read-up I did. So those numbers come down. But I'm curious, within the bounds of what you're comfortable talking about, I think it's patented anyway, isn't it? Is it patented?
It is.
Yeah, so you can talk about it. What's the nature of it? Is it a physical process? Is it changing out chemicals to use things that are chemicals but are bio in nature, that therefore have different, like what's actually happening in that black box in the Fibre52 approach?
Well, the black box is, getting the yarn and so on, and then knitting the fabric or weaving the fabric. Once that fabric goes into a standard dye machine, which is like 80% of the world's, maybe 70% of the world's dye machines, these standard machines, some of them have been around for 50 years and some of them are new, right? We'd like to use the new ones, but we don't, they're not available around the world.
For sure.
The thing about this process is that it follows the process that's been done for the last 100 years. So a dyer, for instance, doesn't really have to change what he does. He still fills the machine up with water.
Right.
He then puts product in there. In this case, it's not a heavy chemical, it's a bioproduct. The only reason I can't tell you what those bioproducts is that you and your listeners don't have what we call an NDA.
That's okay. That's okay. Yep.
But
we can hold on to that.
Right. But the patent is very, very important, because this process can be transferred around the world very, very quickly. So by tomorrow, it could be in several dye houses in China, India, Vietnam, Australia, it can be there.
Yeah.
And that's part of the appeal of this, in that we're not changing the system in that respect. We're changing the system in that we're using these bioproducts.
Right, the inputs into the system.
We're not using the heavy chemical. But to the guy who's working, and that can be me, the guy who's working on the shop floor, who actually turns the dials, opens the vessel,
pulls in a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, gets the water in there, gets the fabric in there, and then puts the product in. he or she, they don't care whether that's a chemical or whether it's my bioproduct. It just does the same. It just does the same thing.
Yeah.
One of them is just a lot more sustainable and real.
Yeah.
Happens to be Fibre52.
Awesome. And I don't need to know the detail of what's in the bio. All will be revealed in due course, I'm sure. What I'm curious about is the process by which you arrive at it. And again, I think about the parallel here with what Great Wrap were doing with the bio-compostable cling wrap. They were vintners. They had a winery from memory, and they were sick of the plastic coming in, and they didn't know anything about chemical, the nature of chemicals. And they went and found a person, I don't know if it was a guy or girl, and kind of experimented in their kitchen, I think is how they did it. I'm not imagining that's the process here. You've got 40 years of experience. How did you go through a process to arrive at changing this stuff? Like, what happened? And I'm interested in the kind of the practical aspect of that, but I'm also interested in the regulatory aspect of it, because I'm imagining that there is still a lot of regulation around how you can approach this. And so if you invent a new way, you actually need to, that's part of the process. Talk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, the processes have changed over the years. I think cotton has changed in its processing less than others. Mm-hmm. The whole dye stuff industry has changed in that there used to be many dye stuff makers, many chemical makers. Now there aren't so.
No, there's three.
Yeah, right. They tend to be bigger. And in a way, when I started dyeing, you had to know a lot more of the theory. Now it's a lot easier. The regulations gradually got tougher and tougher over the years. Some people would argue that they're still not tough enough. But, last week I was on the West Coast processing, and there in California, the regulations are really, really strict. And even then, you could argue that they're not strict enough, but they're getting there, So the processors, the people who are doing the bleaching and the dyeing and putting water down the drains, really have to watch what they do. They really have to. They're being monitored. Whereas in the past, when I was a kid, I lived across some of the biggest dye manufacturer in the world, and the river, we used to base how local the river would be.
Just a sidebar on that. Was that kind of how you got into this, by living across from that?
It was. I always wanted to be a professional cricket player, but guess what? I didn't. And I lived 23 years next to a dye works, making the best dyes in the world with 6,000 people. Everybody in my street worked there.
Right.
And, I couldn't avoid it because there were 3 big dye stuff plants in my town, in a small town. So, it was a big employer in the town. And I actually went for a job at the dye works, and then ended up becoming a dyer anyway.
Where was this, by the way, just for curiosity?
It's a town called Huddersfield in Yorkshire, England, or West Yorkshire. So, and you've got Manchester over the hills in Lancashire, which is a cotton town. Yeah. Huddersfield, my town, was a wool and dye stuff town. And then you've got Leeds, which you might have heard of, also in Yorkshire, which is more of a general textile town, but they made fashion, they made apparel, they made suits and all that kind of thing.
And is a lot of that still there, just as a sidebar, or is a lot of that no longer there?
A lot of it's gone. I mean, in my town, I'm guessing there are probably 80 mills in the town. I'll bet there are 5 or 6 now.
Yeah. You just right up front when we were talking, you talked about manufacturing, just in this case in the US, and a lot of it being done really well there, but also coming back to the US. Is this because the nature of the way the textiles are produced and dyed, and even fashion being made, is getting more and more automated? Is that what's kind of happening? Is that driving the shift, or is there something else at play?
That is driving the shift, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that's driving the shift is people in geography. Because, for instance, in America, when I look at what I was looking at last week was a big knitting plant and dye plant. All that gets sent, or most of that, 80% of it gets sent to Central America for needling into clothes. Mm-hmm. So there's a big pool of people and sewing machinery in Central America that utilizes the textile that's made here in America. There's not a lot of sewing going on here.
Right.
And even though in California there is, you could say there's a lot going on, it's still very, very small. It's not on a mass scale. Right. There are lots of different people doing it, but they may only have 30, 40 people in the factory.
I guess the reason I'm asking that is that the dyeing and processing sounds like it's getting more and more mechanized. And the reason I think that's interesting for what you're doing with Fibre52 is when you tend to have things that are machines and that are being run by the numbers rather than, a lot of manual work, then when there's an innovation that clearly works, the innovation gets adopted very quickly because they just make a decision and then suddenly the whole factory's using it. You don't need to train every individual or upskill them or hire them or whatever it is you need to do. And I think in regards to your Fibre52 kind of go-to-market, you obviously want to get your patent pretty well bedded down before you go out too hard, I'm guessing. But then at that point, you're like, well, why wouldn't every textile company or processing plant use this? Because it's clearly a step up in these credentials and will probably be somewhat driven by the regulation. I'm kind of thinking about EV regulation that's kind of forcing manufacturers to make better cars or buy credits from people who are making better cars. Is there some parallels in what's happening in your industry?
Absolutely. And you're correct. I mean, it may take a few years, but the changes in regulation will drive this process.
Right.
Because in some countries, I'm thinking in a particular country in South America, they're starting to ban these heavy alkalis in their cotton processing.
In South America, you said?
In South America, yeah. And so where cotton's being processed there, that it's starting to happen. So I think it will happen here in America. I think it will happen in Europe. And in fact, we are doing a lot of trials in Italy, for instance, right now. You know, so we and again, there's some pretty serious regulations in that country as well. But what we are finding is my problem is that you go to a big dye house, you know, where they've been doing the same process for the last 60 years, which is most of them.
Right.
And the owner doesn't want a new process, right?
Interesting.
Like, we've just had 3 years of COVID, and you come and offer us a new process. We just want to get back to normal. It's that kind of situation. And you can understand that. But my argument is, well, this is the best time you'll ever get, right? This is the best time you'll ever get to retool, to get moving again, and to do it right.
Yeah.
And having those arguments or discussions, I should say, with the mill, it is also changing the way that Fibre52 is approaching this, in that we're going more to approaching the brands. And that's getting a lot of traction, because when the brand says to the mill, you're going to use this process,
or we'll go elsewhere.
Yeah, right. They may not even say please, but once the brand says, we want this because it's more sustainable, more ecological, and it can add to our sustainability statement, and we can walk the talk, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of our focus is.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, because I think we tend as consumers not to think that what we're doing or where we're putting our dollars matter. But I think if the consumer drives the brand and the brand has purchasing power with, you know, the price taker, which is in this case the textile manufacturer or the processor, that is your consumer dollar at play. Like, it's silly to think that doesn't matter. I think there's something else that's interesting that happens when I'm in two minds about Allbirds. I think what they're trying to do is good, but I think the nature of it, maybe there's some other things, and that's probably a whole nother show. But I think as a brand, they have absolutely shifted the conversation on, it's not just being a good company, but also having sustainable materials in the things that you manufacture. And I think if you're bringing process to market and you can attach yourself to one or two brands that people already look at, and I know you didn't mention them before, but Patagonia is another good example of that, is a really solid way to kind of, you know, basically front the bases. I don't know if that's the correct baseball term, but to do that type of thing. I'm kind of interested as well, before we jumped on the call, you were talking about your experience with Woolmark, which was, I'm going to play it back, and if I get it wrong, tell me, but it's essentially was an industry body that was owned by all the wool farmers in Australia, and they contributed some of their revenue to enable Woolmark to go out and advocate for the industry and move the industry forward. Is that kind of a fair summation of Woolmark?
Yeah, that is fair. Yeah. A fine organisation. They're very much involved in how wool was processed around the world. But also, when I joined, Australian Wool Innovation was kind of the, I don't know how to put it, but that was the body that was working with the Woolmark. Right. What we were doing is spending a lot of growers' money on innovation. Right. So we were really investing in science to move wool forward as
a whole category.
Yeah, as a whole category. And the Woolmark were more in the consumer end and the retail end, doing all the good stuff out there, where AWI, we were more looking at the science behind improving wool, what were called the failures of wool. I mean, I never see any failures in wool because I just love it. But yeah, we did, I mean, bleaching, we're just talking about bleaching. In fundamental science, we actually discovered the chromophore that makes wool yellow in sunlight, and we kind of fixed that. And so things like that were going on at the time. I'm not sure now because I've been
Been out of the game.
For quite a while, yeah. And I'm more cotton facing than wool facing.
You got your amino acids and your, what was the other one? Cellulose.
Cellulose.
I guess the thing that I was coming to with that is the thing that was interesting about what Woolmark did as a consumer brand, and this is just my casual knowledge of it, I don't have deep knowledge of it, is that they created a sense of desire and belonging for people to want to have that thing attached. And if you went and bought it and it had Woolmark on it, you'd be like, that must be good quality because it has that thing on it. And I think inevitably when you make a step change in the way something's made, people will want to gravitate to that as long as they can identify with it and attach themselves to it. And Fibre52 feels like the AWI here, and there ultimately might be a brand, which may also be Fibre52. You know, you're obviously working with brands, but are you thinking about your brand as well and what that might mean to actually externalize that in some way?
You know, your analogy is perfect there. I'm going to say that's great, Vincent. But I think we're looking at Fibre52 as being an ingredient brand, something like Gore-Tex, you know, where we kind of stand behind the process, but we pass it on as a license. Sure. So we want to make sure the right guys are using it in the right way before you get a license.
Right.
And then you pay us a very small fee to use it. That's how we then reinvest. But we do have a program where if you would like to educate with our swing tickets on your garment or even use other kinds of labels, then we will supply those. You know, so we're an ingredient branders now. Will we go further? I don't know.
I reckon if you could become the Gore-Tex of cotton, you would be doing amazing. That would be a good measure of success to use to pick up on your analogy of my analogy. I think we're in meta analogy land. Just this is absolutely fascinating. Just in terms of like really what's in front of you right now, I think some of it sounds like stuff that you just have to get through, and I'm thinking about the patent. But what are the one or two major levers that are there for you at the moment that you're thinking, if I can get through these things, then we're past that inflection point? Like, talk me through those one or two things. And the reason I always ask this is because I'm interested in enabling this conversation to form part of how you get through that process.
Yeah, it's belief. So basically, you're right. The patents have taken up a lot of time because we didn't want to go out there and suddenly lose it all because we didn't have the correct patents in place. And that took a long time. So we're a year and a half doing that. And you're the second podcast I've done. And, you know, so we've really not put it out raw. And another reason we've held back is that we're spending tens of thousands of dollars on testing, right? You know, what is this? When you process cotton in the Fibre52 way, there are some really interesting factors, and this ties into what you're saying, in that the cotton is stronger, so it wears longer, it doesn't braid as badly, it doesn't pill up, it doesn't fuzz, but also it moves moisture from your body. Because, you know, if you run around in a cotton T-shirt in Sydney, it's stuck to you pretty quickly. I've been there and done it.
Yeah.
With Fibre52, that doesn't happen. The moisture moves off your body, it goes away, and it doesn't reabsorb. And that was just a nice find. I didn't ever intend that, by the way. It's just that that's what happens. And a lot of people say to me, oh, look, you're cheating. What you're doing is you put in what we call a DWR, which is a durable water repellent.
Right.
And you can put these durable water repellents onto a fibre and it will repel moisture. It will, but it doesn't do what Fibre52 is doing.
Which is wicked.
It doesn't, and keeping the fibre stronger.
Yeah, right.
It's not actually wicked. Well, I wish I could say that because that'd be another thing out of my way. It's kind of find out what it's doing, right? So there's something happening, and it's a good to have. By the way, this is not a problem. But the other thing is belief, and so I'm working with trying to get garments made as we speak to get on the backs of a bunch of athletes, just to get this on the backs of people that will try it. And we'll, like you're telling the world about it, they'll have worn it and there'll be influencers and they'll say, hey guys, you got to try this. It's a natural fiber, but it's doing all the things that synthetic fibers are actually invented for.
Yeah, or saying they do.
Yeah, or saying they do, exactly. Yeah. And we'll all be there. But yeah, right now that's what, you know, it's the belief in this process, and it's the belief in the resultant fabric or fiber. If I can say it, in Italy, I can't mention the brands, but these are exalted luxury brands that have found out about Fibre52. And what we have there is very, very nice cotton yarn being dyed. The yarn itself is being dyed before being made into sweaters, undergarments, and so on. And that kind of area is fascinating because, and you're into people who are using particularly cashmere, being a noble fibre.
Yeah.
But also to get cotton into this sphere is quite interesting. And so again, we're getting there, we're getting out there, but it's one step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, we had a chat to Peter Brennan it's from a non-alcoholic beer brand called Heaps Normal a couple episodes ago. And he's a brand guy. And it was so fascinating to understand the nature of building and crafting a brand and a narrative. I'm never sure what that word exactly means, but I think I'm using it correctly in this context. And how that was critical to the success. The product was very good, right? It's hard to, I think the Australian term is hard to polish a turd. The product has to be good. But ultimately, if you have a great product and you don't find a great way to tell a great story about that product and have people know how to tell that story for you, it's very hard to achieve scale with these things or in any degree of time without just becoming a sales organization, which I think is the challenge in and of itself. And so it's fascinating that you're at this point where you're like, I know this stuff works. Yes, we want to do more testing, but largely in aid of creating a narrative and credibility so that people will be, will shift from being the 60-year-old running factory that doesn't do this to this is an imperative now, we have to do this.
Absolutely right. And to that end, we've got some very good marketing people on our team.
Good.
And not from the textile industry. I mean, you've got me from the textile industry who's been involved and worked with and my own brands.
Right.
But I wanted somebody from outside the industry. Like, the analogy there with the non-alcoholic beer. I can imagine that is a fascinating marketing experience and tough. Yeah, we face exactly that right now. And, the marketing guys who I work with are thinking outside the box, where I come.
Yeah.
I'm too close to it.
That's the founder's dilemma, or one of 5 founder's dilemmas from memory.
And dead right.
Wonderful. Well, Graham, it's been wonderful chatting to you. I think we'll leave it there for today. And look, I'm just excited because get a sense when I talk to people of where they're up to in the journey and like where the inflection point is, and like reading about the material science that's going into this and some of the understanding of how this actually transforms it. It just feels like it's at an inflection point. So I'm super excited to see what follows in the next 3 to 6 months as this goes forward. But always, if there's someone who's listening who has a lever here that could help Graham, I would absolutely love for them to reach out. They can find him at Fibre52. Just Google it, you'll find it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming onto the show. And yeah, looking forward to tracking the meteoric rise from here for you guys.
Well, thank you, Vincent. It's been a pleasure to be a guest of such a worthy podcast. And thanks for putting the word out.
Absolutely.
Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.